For nearly 2,000 years it sat in the ground, outside the ancient city of Ctesiphon, near modern Baghdad, waiting, while empires rose and fell above it, while centuries turned to dust. Waiting for the moment someone would understand what it actually was. In 1938, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm Kieg was sorting through excavated artifacts at the National Museum of Iraq, routine work, the careful cataloging of ancient things, and then he picked up a small clay jar and stopped completely. 14 centimeters tall, a small clay jar, unremarkable to look at, but inside, a copper cylinder, rolled from a sheet of copper and soldered with a tin lead alloy. Inside that cylinder, an iron rod, held in place by asphalt. The iron rod insulated from the copper asphalt at the top. Every component precisely fitted, every element in exact relationship to every other. Kieg turned the object over in his hands. He had seen this design before, not in ancient Mesopotamia, in modern laboratories. He recognized it because he had seen it in electrochemistry classrooms, in textbooks describing the basic principles of electrical battery construction. The object in his hands was not an unknown ritual vessel, it was a voltaic cell, a battery. Built at least 1,500 years ago. The object dated to somewhere between 250 BC and 24 AD. At least 1,500 years old, Alessandro Volta invented the voltaic pylon 1800, the moment credited with launching the modern era of electrical science. This object dated that moment be nearly 2 millennia. A voltaic cell works on a simple principle. Two metals, an acidic liquid between them, a current flows. The Baghdad Battery has two metals, copper and iron. Fill the clay jar with any acidic liquid available in ancient Mesopotamia, and it generates electricity. Vinegar, grape juice. Lemon juice, wine. Any of these liquids, freely available in ancient Mesopotamia, activates the device. The copper and iron create a potential difference. The acid completes the circuit. Current flows. Not as theory. As physical, measurable electricity. Researchers have built exact replicas. Same clay, same copper, same iron, same asphalt, same construction, in exactly the same configuration as the original. And measured the output. Every replica worked. Every one generated a measurable electrical current, between 1.5 and 2 volts. That is the output of the Baghdad Battery replicas. The same voltage as a modern AA battery, enough to power a small light, enough to drive a small motor, enough, most significantly, to electroplate a metal surface. Electroplating, the process of depositing a thin layer of one metal onto an ethersing electrical current. Pass current through an acid solution containing dissolved gold, and gold deposits evenly on any metal surface connected to the circuit. A thin, perfect, continuous layer of gold. Kieg published his findings in 1940. He proposed that the Baghdad Battery and several similar objects found at the same location were used for electroplating, gilding metal objects with a thin layer of gold or silver using electrical current. The proposal generated enormous interest and enormous controversy. The controversy did not produce a clear resolution, it produced something more typical. Mainstream archaeology absorbed the finding, minimized its implications, and moved on, without resolving central question, without answering one thing that mattered. This is what mainstream archaeology constantly does. When an artifact produces implications too inconvenient for the conventional timeline, it absorbs the finding, it minimizes it frames it as ambiguous or misinterpreted, and it moves on, leaving the central question unanswered. The conventional position, the Baghdad Battery was probably used for storing sacred scrolls or for some ritual purpose. Its resemblance to a battery is coincidental. It is just a jar with a metal cylinder inside. The design that functions as a battery was not intentional. That explanation requires you to believe specific combination of copper cylinder, iron rod, and acidic electrolyte, all correctly configured to generate electrical current, was assembled by accident. That the asphalt insulation serves no electrical purpose. That everything works by coincidence. Look at the copper cylinder, rolled from a sheet of copper, soldered with a tin lead alloy, sealed at the bottom. Open at the top where the iron rod enters. This is not casual construction. This is precise, intentional fabrication of a specific component for a specific purpose. The iron rod sits centered inside the copper cylinder, not touching the copper wall. That separation is critical. If the rod touches the cylinder, the device short circuits, no current flows. The rod is held precisely in position. Beat the asphalt plug, precisely, not approximately, precisely. The asphalt at the top of the jar does two things. It holds the iron rod in place. It insulates the rod from the copper. In electrical engineering, insulation between two conductors is not decorative. It is functional. It is the difference between a working battery and a failed one. Remove the copper cylinder, no current. Remove the iron rod, no current. Remove the acid, no current. Remove the insulation, short circuit, no current. Every element of the Baghdad battery is functionally necessary for it to work. Every single one. The probability that all of these elements were combined accidentally in the correct configuration is not zero, but it is very low, and it becomes lower still when you consider that multiple similar devices were found at the same location, not one accident, many. This is the detailed coincidence argument cannot adequately explain. Multiple similar devices found at the same location. Not a single accidental combination of materials that happened to work. A repeated design. Someone made this device more than once. That is not accident. That is craft. The electroplating hypothesis is supported by physical evidence found at other ancient Near Eastern sites. Objects coated with thin layers of metal whose application cannot be easily explained by conventional gilding. TechniQuest mainstream archaeology assumes we're the only methods available. The sarcophagus of a Sumerian king found at the ancient city of Ur shows gold plating of a thinness and evenness that is very difficult to achieve with fire gilding or mercury amalgam methods. The methods mainstream archaeology assumes we're the only techniques available. The plating is too thin, too even. Electroplating produces exactly this kind of result. A thin, perfectly even, continuous layer of metal, deposited uniformly across every surface current can reach, no drips, no thick spots. No uneven application. The ancient plating matches the electroplating result, precisely. If the ancient Mesopotamians are electroplating objects, then they were using electrical current. And if they were using electrical current, then someone understood enough about electricity to harness it practically. Even if that understanding was empirical rather than theoretical, even if they did not know it worked, they knew that it did. Empirical knowledge is still knowledge. You do not need to understand electron transfer theory to discover that certain metals in certain acids produce a current that deposits gold onto silver. You need only to observe, to experiment, to repeat. The ancient world was full of people who observed, experimented, and repeated. The Baghdad Battery is not an isolated finding. It fits into a broader pattern, a pattern of ancient technical knowledge that coincides each with the conventional timeline expects, a pattern that keeps appearing in the archaeological record, and a pattern of institutional resistance to taking it seriously that is itself remarkably consistent. The Baghdad Battery is not an isolated finding. It fits into a broader pattern, a pattern of ancient technical knowledge that consistently exceeds with the conventional timeline expects, a pattern that keeps appearing in the archaeological record, and a pattern of institutional resistance to taking it seriously, that is itself remarkably consistent. Roman concrete structures built 2,000 years ago that still stand, still structurally sound, while modern concrete begins to degrade within decades. Analysis revealed that Roman concrete actually strengthens over time through a chemical reaction that modern concrete science is only now beginning to replicate. Individually, each of these findings can be explained away. The Antikythera mechanism, a one-off genius. Roman concrete, a lucky combination. The Baghdad Battery, a coincidental design. Individually, each explanation is possible, uncomfortable, but possible. Together, they form a pattern that is much harder to dismiss, a pattern of ancient technical capability that consistently exceeds conventional model of what ancient peoples were able to do. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, across different cultures, across different centuries. The conventional model of human history assumes a linear progression. Primitive ancient peoples, gradually developing tools and knowledge, culminating in modern technology. It assumes that ancient civilizations did not have access to technical knowledge by what their supposed stage of development allowed. The evidence disagrees. The resistance is itself revealing. When a pattern of findings consistently exceeds what the conventional model expects, the rational response is to revise the model. Instead, mainstream archaeology repeatedly revises the findings, explains them away, minimizes them, labels them coincidence. The pattern of resistance is as consistent as the pattern of findings. The Baghdad Battery represents a question that mainstream science answered too quickly and too conveniently. A question about the depth and the breadth of ancient technical knowledge that deserves a more honest answer than the one it has been given. The ancient Mesopotamians are not primitive. They built cities of extraordinary complexity. They developed mathematics and astronomy. They created legal systems and literature. And if the Baghdad Battery is what it appears, they also understood enough about electrochemistry design, construct, and use a functional electrical cell. Imagine an ancient workshop in Mesopotamia. Clay jars filled with grape juice, metal objects suspended in the acid, gold dissolving from one surface, depositing on another. No wires in the modern sense, no switches, no gauges, but the same fundamental process that modern electroplating plants use today, understood empirically, applied practically. Alessandro Volta is credited with inventing the battery in 1800. The voltaic pile, the moment that launched the electrical age. History books name him as the man who discovered that certain metals in acid generate electrical current. But if the Baghdad Battery is what it appears to be, someone else knew that first. By nearly 2,000 years, 250 BC to 224 AD. That is the range, Alessandro Volta minus 1,800 AD. The gap is nearly 2,000 years, 2,000 years during which the knowledge existed, was used, and was then lost. Not gradually, not through slow cultural decline, lost completely. As if it had never been. The Baghdad Battery today is stored in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, the same city or close to it, as the ancient city of Siphon, where it spent nearly 2,000 years in the ground, full circle. Though the circumstances of its recent history are considerably darker than the circumstances of its creation. In 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, the Iraq Museum in Baghdad was looted. Thousands of artifacts were stolen or destroyed in the chaos that followed the fall of the city. Objects that had survived for thousands of years, lost in days. Among the artifacts reported missing was the Baghdad Battery. It was subsequently recovered. Exactly when, by whom, under what circumstances, the record is not entirely clear. Its precise condition since the recovery, and its exact current location within the museum collection, have not been consistently reported. The artifact survived, but the uncertainty around it adds another layer to an already complicated story. Other artifacts from the same excavation, similar objects, that may have helped resolve the questions around the battery, were not recovered. Some were destroyed, some entered the black market, some are simply gone. The evidence that might have settled the electroplating question definitively no longer exists. What the Baghdad Battery represents, regardless of its physical location, is a question, not a resolved question, not a closed one. An open question about the depth of ancient technical knowledge that mainstream science answered too quickly, too conveniently, and without adequate engagement with the evidence. The most important inventions in history may have been made, and forgotten, long before we think they were. The Baghdad Battery, the Antikythera mechanism, Roman concrete. These are not curiosities, they are evidence. Evidence of a human past more technically sophisticated than the conventional model is prepared to acknowledge. Knowledge is not permanent. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall. The knowledge they accumulate does not always survive at the collapse of the civilization that held it. The Baghdad Battery may represent knowledge that was discovered, used, and lost, and then rediscovered 100 years later by Alessandro Volta, who received all the credit. The Baghdad Battery deserves a more honest answer than the one it has been given. Not the comfortable institutional answer that calls it a scroll jar and moves on, but a rigorous answer, one that engages seriously with every element of the design, every piece of physical evidence, and every implication of what the object actually is. The question is still open. Did ancient Mesopotamians and use the electrical current 1,500 years bear the modern world invented the battery? The evidence says, possibly. The design says, probably. And the institutional response to that possibilities is something important about how we choose to understand our past. For nearly 2,000 years, it sat in the ground, patient, silent, unchanged, holding its design intact throughout every civilization that rose and fell above it. When it was finally found, we were not ready to understand what it was. 80 years later, we may still not be. For more ancient mysterious and hidden histories, stories of what human beings were capable of long before we gave them credit, subscribe and keep exploring. Because the most important inventions in history may have been mad and forgotten long before we think they were. Until next time, stay curious.